So we're going to move into the last segment before the break, and before we do this, I'll mention two things. Number one, we did have the intent that Dr. Tom Martin from UCSF would be giving this talk, but he just was not available. He came to teach the Chinese doctors, but he just couldn't stay and be here for this afternoon. And so I'm going to introduce this idea of the new drugs and the approach to relapse, but we're going to have the panel come up so that you can get the opinions of Dr. Bessio and Jean-Luc about the new drugs and which of the new drugs look the most promising. So I'm just going to introduce this topic, starting with what should be the approach when it seems that the myeloma is relapsing, and then which of the new drugs are looking the most promising right now, and what does it look like in terms of getting approval from the FDA. So if we look at this chart right here, you can see that we really have been pretty fortunate in the area of myeloma, where if you go back into the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and up into the 90s, there were not that many treatments available. We had radiation and melphalan and steroids. We had this VAD regimen, and then we had transplant. And this was the treatment all through the 60s and the 70s. And so it was only actually in the late 90s that we started to get more drugs becoming available. And the first of these novel drugs was thalidomide, which was tested in the late 1990s. 1997, 1998, we started to use thalidomide, which was approved. And then that's also when we were testing Iridia, and then also mini allotransplant. But then you move forward to the year 2000. So basically in the last 10, 15 years, you see this increasing list of drugs. These ones have already been approved. Velcade, Revlimid, and then more recently carfilzomib, pomalidomide, which is Pomalyst, and this high DAC inhibitor, that was panabinostat, which was the last one that got approved, kind of controversial actually, and we could talk about this. And then these are the three new drugs which have already been submitted to the FDA. So the results of the trials with elotuzumab, the anti-CD38, in this case it's the daratumumab, and then the oral proteasome inhibitor. So this is the drug which is like Velcade, and it's coming from the Millennium Takeda company, and this is called ixazomib. Don't ask me where they come up with these names. Ixazomib. So those three are in trials, and we're looking to get approval with those. So this is great, but one of the issues is that that's actually quite a lot of drugs, and as I said in one of the videos, it's important to know how and when to use all of these different drugs. The impact of those drugs has been significant, and you've seen these different charts. So with the introduction of these drugs, so in that same time frame, since the year 2000, the survival for myeloma, the response and survival has really been significantly increasing, and this is really tremendous. And that has been from a combination of stem cell transplant as well as those novel agents. So the approach to relapse is to assess the relapse. If the myeloma protein level is going up, or you have some pain or a new lesion, it's important to do some testing and figure out what would be the next best thing to do. And so what are those next best things? Well, as I've just shown you, it depends a little bit of these different new drugs, what has happened before. And so when we're trying to decide, will we use one of these new drugs, we really want to talk to you carefully and review the records to see, well, what happened before? If we gave you Velcade back over here and then you're relapsing over here, we would be thinking about, let's try some kind of a Velcade combination because it worked over here. If we gave you Revlimid and Dex and it did not work, and then you moved on to the Velcade over here, we might not be so keen to give you pomalidomide because that's a similar kind of a drug. We might be going to use Velcade or carfilzomib. So when we're talking about a relapse treatment, it's really, really important to review carefully what has been done before. Did you have frontline therapy, consolidation? Did you have a transplant? And did you have consolidation or maintenance? At the point of the relapse, are you on maintenance or did you stop the maintenance? That really affects the choice. As several people mentioned, the Revlimid can hold you in remission, but obviously if you're on Revlimid, then that limits the choices at the point of relapse. You need to get to the next line of therapy after that. So the approach to relapse includes these things right here. It's extremely important to monitor the status of your disease. Initially, you're going in for testing every month, sometimes every week or even every couple of weeks. As you start on treatment, we want to be really sure if the treatment's working and what's happening with your blood count, your kidneys, all the chemical testing. So it's very frequent testing, and then it'll go to once a month, and then as you get further along, it's going to be every couple of months, every 3 months. We usually don't go much beyond that unless you're doing really well for many years. If the protein is going up or something is happening with your tests, we go back and look at what happened before and review that and see if one of these previous therapies could be used in some way or not. We would try to do that. Typically, we would try to use these combinations before we would immediately go to a new drug. Although sometimes, with some of these new drugs, we heard the story about a gentleman who took daratumumab. Some of these newer drugs that we have right now are so promising that we might say, well, this other stuff did work, but the daratumumab looks really great. Maybe we'll give that a try, and then we always do have these other drugs to go back to. And so this is not a 100% statement right here. Maybe we will try some of those combos, or maybe we might go to a new agent. Something that has been touched on is that if you've had a fantastic response with transplant, and have been in remission for at least 2 years, but we have patients here who've been in remission for 5 years, maybe longer. If you've had a long remission and the myeloma is relapsing, we would definitely have a second transplant, what we call a salvage transplant, as one of the options. And so we would be looking at transplant in this situation as one of the options. So you could have transplant, you could maybe have daratumumab, you could maybe have elotuzumab, you could maybe have carfilzomib or pomalidomide. We're looking at these in somewhat of an equal way. Each one could maybe help you, each one could have different side effects, each one could be predicted to be helpful to a different degree depending on what's happened before. What happened before is really one of the most helpful things to us. The other thing is that when the myeloma is relapsing, much more frequently we want to keep you on therapy. So if you've been maybe off therapy and then the myeloma is bouncing back, that gives us some hesitation about stopping the therapy. And so much more frequently we'll say, okay, well, you're back in remission, but maybe we should continue with some maintenance. So that's what I mean here about continuous therapy. So those are major elements in deciding what to do at relapse. And of course, versus the standard approach, check if a new trial is available here in the Los Angeles area. And as you know, several of the different centers have quite a few trials available at City of Hope, at Cedars, UCSF, UCLA, and even up to UCSF in San Francisco. They really have a lot of trials there, which is why I'd actually wanted Dr. Martin from UCSF to be here today to talk to you. But I have a number of these slides, which I'll show you. So putting together these different combinations, we are looking at different classes of drugs. And so this is the way that we look at the treatment. So we're looking at steroids, and although steroids have a lot of side effects, frequently, especially at relapse, we'll add in steroids to try to get the treatment to work better. So for example, if you've been taking Revlimid by itself as maintenance, a first step might be just to add in steroids to get it to work again. Then we would look at combinations of bortezomib with steroids or bortezomib with thalidomide or Revlimid, and as I said, consider stem cell as a way to get you back under full control. And then, as for the evaluation throughout the disease, we're looking at how old are you, what are your risk of the cytogenetics. So if you have the 414, the 17p, all these things we've been talking about, that influences our choice more towards Velcade or carfilzomib, which seem to be a little bit better in the high-risk situation. If you have kidney problems, if it's an IV treatment, carfilzomib is a concern. You have to take carfilzomib Monday, Tuesday, each week for 3 weeks in a row. That's quite a problem if you have to travel, 2-3 hours to the infusion center. So we have to think about that versus maybe pomalidomide, which is by mouth and is a whole lot easier. Then it depends if your blood counts are low. If your blood counts are really low, that definitely can influence whether we would give you a high dose that would really knock your counts low. So all of these things, including what do you feel about the options, is obviously very, very important. So I've put together a list, and this is the list that we can talk about together, and then in a minute I'll be having the other doctors come up so that we can talk about what do we think about these new drugs that are coming and available now. And as you've heard, we are most excited about the anti-CD38, of which there's daratumumab and the SAR compound. And Dr. McHale is not here to pronounce the new commercial name for that. But anyway, I think it was something to do with pizza. So this is the SAR pizza, I think, here. Then there's elotuzumab, and then the anti-CD138, what are called checkpoint inhibitors. This is the new Velcade by mouth, and then a number of these other ones here. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on those to give you some flavor of what these involve, but each one of those do have a significant benefit in myeloma. So first of all, the daratumumab is the most exciting, and that's because it's active as what we call a single agent. Some of these drugs, they only work if you give them in a combination, but daratumumab works by itself. So if you give daratumumab, it works. Elotuzumab, I'll show you in a minute, if you give elotuzumab, it doesn't work. It makes Revlimid and Dex work better, but it doesn't work by itself, okay? So daratumumab has a direct benefit, and it also is dose dependent. So if you give a small dose, here you can see that we're getting partial remissions, which means that the myeloma dropped by 50%. However, if you gave double the dose, you can see here you got some complete remissions right here, very good partial remissions. So it's dose dependent. So, and now we know that we need to give this dose. And that's part of what we call the phase 1-2 testing to see which dose is the best. So it's dose dependent and works by itself. And this just shows you the trial using the different doses, the 8 milligram and then double the dose. And you can see the double dose is the red. And so if you look over here, this is the depth of the response. So if you have a VGPR, that means the protein drops by 90%. So you can see here, 90% is right here. So you can see there's a lot more red related to the deep response. So that if you give the higher dose, you get more not only do more patients respond, but they get the deeper responses. And with the lower dose, you see there's more blue over this way, and then there were some patients who did not respond, so the myeloma progressed. The myeloma protein was going up here. But you can see most of the patients, it was either stabilized or in some of them, it really went down. And that's why this has been submitted to the FDA, and just with this one trial, we're expecting that the FDA will look at this favorably and maybe get some approval by maybe the end of October. And people are talking about this is going to be the Halloween approval. The other thing is, does daratumumab work in patients that are double refractory? And so that means, does it work in patients who have gone through, like the Velcade, the Revlimid, all those previous treatments? And the answer to that is yes, because 95% of these people in these trials were actually double refractory. So it is able to rescue patients who've gone through those other therapies. So this is a very important part of these trials. And then the question is, how long does the benefit last? And so here you can see that the benefit is lasting, even those patients who've gone through everything, is lasting about 4 months. And even more impressive than that is the survival, even for patients who have gone through everything, is really quite good. So it's able to keep patients going so that then they would be around to maybe need another drug later. So really quite a remarkable benefit. This is the results with the other anti-CD38. This is the one, the SAR compound, the pizza SAR. And you can see it's a similar pattern, maybe not quite as impressive. They haven't, for some reason, pushed the dose testing as much with this SAR compound, so we don't really know so clearly the impact with the 20 milligram dose. You see that they had a lot smaller doses. They had the 1 milligram, 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams, and they had much more limited testing at the higher dose. So there's more work to be done with the SAR. But when we asked at our working group meeting where we had 100 or so myeloma experts, the myeloma experts are certainly thinking that daratumumab is the one to be the most promising. 85% thought it was the most important. This shows you the results with the elotuzumab. And the trial for that was called the ELOQUENT-2 trial. And this was quite a large study where half of the patients, over 300 patients here, got Revlimid and Dex, and then the other half of the patients got elotuzumab plus Revlimid and Dex. And you can see that the length of the remission was significantly longer, over a year and a half versus a bit over a year, so significantly longer when you gave the elotuzumab along with the Rev-Dex. Both the elotuzumab and the daratumumab are given by IV infusion. Those are monoclonal antibodies. They have to be infused carefully over at least 1 to 3 hours, sometimes longer. And the main thing is because of allergic reactions and fever. With elotuzumab, the risk of the allergic reactions is fairly low. It was actually about 9% in this. With daratumumab, it was actually a bit higher, above 40%. And so one of the downsides of the daratumumab is these allergic reactions, which means that you might need to stay in the infusion center a little bit longer to get the IV. But you can see in this case that the remissions were quite good, and actually in this case, at 2 years, over 40% of the patients were still in remission. So really quite promising. Just to show you, this is a whole different idea. These are called checkpoint inhibitors. So this would be the tumor, this would be the myeloma, and then this would be the T cell that could be attacking the myeloma. And it's getting blocked. And so if you use a checkpoint inhibitor, it means that the T cell can start to kill the myeloma again. And this seems like it could be a helpful way to treat the myeloma, but those studies are in the early phases. This is the panobinostat, which is now commercially available, and I know there's one or two people in the room who are taking this right now. The results with the panobinostat were in combination with Velcade and Dex. So again, in this case, you need to use it as part of a combo, and combining it with Velcade and Dex, the results, I would have to say, were not super spectacular. Here you had a remission of 12 months versus 8 months, and a response of 60% versus 54%. So it was not so spectacular, although it was contributing something. And also the toxicity was kind of challenging, quite a bit. The diarrhea, not trivial, low blood counts. Look at this here. Really knocks your blood counts for a loop, and also quite a bit of tiredness. So this is not a trivial drug in terms of side effects, and not so spectacular benefit. And you can see here, patients obviously did better, the blue versus the yellow. In thinking about all of the different options, you need to look at that and then look at, well, what about using a combination of some of the drugs that are already approved? And so I've been involved in a study that we've been doing for the last couple of years or so, actually 3 or more years now, where we have been combining carfilzomib and pomalidomide. And so if you've gone through Revlimid and you've gone through Velcade, how about if you take carfilzomib combined with pomalidomide together? How does that work? Well, it turns out that that is actually pretty good. And we've seen high remission rates where the remissions have been lasting close to a year. And actually, the overall survival of these patients who are what we call relapse refractory is over 2 years. And so this has been a very successful, I would say, commercial backup. This is something that you can take using drugs that are commercially available. So a very effective option. At the opposite end of the scale, this has been in the news, is something that's called CAR T cells. And these are where you take the T cells out of the body, you play with them in the lab, and then you give them back, and they attack the myeloma against the CD19. And this is a very dramatic example. There were 5 patients in this study that were treated, and 2 of them, 3 of them didn't respond, but 2 of them had kind of a dramatic response like this, where they previously had a autologous stem cell transplant, and then here they were progressing again, and then over here you can see that they've had a sustained remission for quite some period of time here with very, very low levels of disease after getting these CAR T cells. So these are activated T cells which are killing the myeloma. This is only possible in 4 or 5% of myelomas right now, but there is an idea to expand this using different technology to be able to treat more kinds of patients. Then there was this crazy story about measles viral therapy. So how many of you heard about this in the news? Okay, yeah, so this was widely on the news. In fact, I think I've got it here. Yeah, I heard about it from the Star Tribune. This was the first I heard of it. It was in the newspaper. And people called me up to say, what did I think about the article in the Star Tribune? And I was like, oh, I don't get the Star Tribune. It's because it's published in Minnesota. This was a study that was published in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings, but actually the article had not come out yet. So the doctors had not seen the information yet. But this was the treatment results for 2 patients that they got IV of a huge number of measles vaccine vials. Now, in this case, the measles vaccine has been engineered to attack the myeloma. So when you get the measles vaccine, it doesn't cause measles. The measles, which is a weakened virus, is built up to attack the myeloma. So it's a whole new approach, which is called, it's got this word here, systemic oncolytic virotherapy. So this is a virus that will kill the myeloma wherever it is. And Dr. Stephen Russell, right here, he calls this a one-shot cure. Yeah, because this one lady, she got the one shot, she got pretty sick, high fever for several days. She was in the intensive care unit, but all of the myeloma melted away. And so, as they say here, massive blast of measles vaccine wipes out cancer. And that's why I was getting, my phone was ringing off the hook. And this lady did fantastically well. About it appeared that the myeloma was gone. And this was fantastic because she had gone through every kind of therapy before. But after about 9-10 months, the myeloma came back, and she actually got a lesion in her skull right about here. And they treated that with radiation. And as I understand it, she's actually still in remission right now. And so this is a completely new approach that could maybe be very, very effective for myeloma. We don't really need to go through this, but basically the measles virus attacks through a CD46, so that it basically attaches to the surface of the myeloma, and it also recruits the cells around the immune cells to attack the myeloma. But it doesn't attack normal cells or cause measles. And now they have a bigger trial. So they have a trial which has been accruing since last October. We don't know the results of that, but it's ongoing. And they're actually now using a different virus called VSV, vesicular stomatitis virus. They have several plans in the work, but they're using a different virus which may be even more effective. So this is pretty exciting, although it takes time to know. So just to summarize, and then we can take your questions for discussion, this is the top 10. I've gone through a number of them. There are also a number of others, different inhibitors and the like, and so it's really pretty exciting times in myeloma to see how all these different new therapies might work. And so we've moved forward from more options, better combos, longer remissions, and now we're looking at ways, really unusual ways, that maybe we could even start to wipe out myeloma, even in patients who have had a lot of previous therapy. So this is kind of the status of where we are. And I've moved the black swan. He's kind of in the shade here. I've got to move him back up into the light here. But anyway, he's currently hiding. Anyway. No, we don't. That's very, very important. So anyway, that's sort of an introduction, and so we'll be ready for questions. And I'd like that Dr. Jean-Luc Harasso and Dr. Bessie will come up so we can handle your questions about relapse and new drugs. Thank you. All right, questions?
But I'm going to wait for them to sit down. I'm going to be polite.
So you don't want me sneaking in some answers before they get there?
No,
in case
because
they're
going to call you out on
I know,
anything that
they
they don't
would probably
agree with.
contradict me. I know.
I never disagree with you, Brian, right?
Okay. Oh, no.
Sure.
Okay, right here.
All right. So I picked up a fact sheet for an expanded access program for elotuzumab with Len and Dex out on the table.
Yes.
There aren't any California sites accepting patients. Is that likely to change?
Well, we certainly hope so. When these expanded access programs are put out by the drug companies, these are ways to try to get access before the drug is approved. So elotuzumab has been submitted to the FDA and probably will get approved October, November. So we're talking about a span of a few months here. And so because of the way that the IRBs work, the regulations of the hospital, they submit all the papers into the IRB. It can take a few months. So many times, by the time it gets through the IRB and the sites are up and running, they're getting the sites up and running, the drug is approved. So there's a small window of time. The other thing is that there are a number of issues, so that you do get the drug for free, so that the elotuzumab is for free, but going in to get the elotuzumab is not for free. So that it's going to cost you, it takes, I think, for example, at City of Hope, they were telling me that it costs, I think, $250 an hour for the infusion. So it could cost like $1,000. The drug's free, but it could cost you $1,000 to get the drug. So there are a number of issues in these compassionate use programs. And so that's why we, on the side of the IMF, we push really hard to get the approval when the drug and the infusion would be covered, okay? Yeah?
Suzanne. Okay,
Go for
right
it,
here.
yeah.
My understanding is that in the case of daradutamab, sometimes it takes some period of time for the drug to start working. On
Yes.
average, how long does it take to start its effect if it's going to?
Were you thinking of any drug in particular?
The DARA.
Oh, the DARA? So, either one of you want to comment about the speed of action for the DARA? Bob?
We had the opportunity to use it at Cedars, and you know, I think it didn't, in our anecdotal experience of, you know, less than 10 patients, it didn't, patients that were progressing really rapidly sometimes didn't have enough time for it to work. Maybe it would have worked if they had time to achieve, you know, get it for longer, but the disease was growing so fast that some people may not have had a chance for it to allow it to work. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the best drug if things are rapidly growing.
Right.
You know, it's being used more now in studies in combination, so the hope also is that very quickly, assuming it's approved, it'll be approved in combinations where it makes a lot of sense.
Right, to use it in combo. So this is the gentleman over here who did take the daratumumab. How long did it take for it to work in your case? Yeah, you want to give him the mic? So you...
Okay. In my case, the results were almost immediate.
Okay.
On the trial, the first 3 months, I got it every week. So it brought the numbers down fairly rapidly, and I think almost immediately as soon as I started taking it.
Okay, so this is a variable, I think, for
Yeah,
some
it is
patients. So
variable.
what do you think, Jean?
I think what's interesting with daratumumab is first that it can induce complete responses in relapse patients,
Right.
which is not so frequent with a single agent. And second, you showed the slide. Of course, when looking at the percentage of responses in double refractory patients, is not that impressive. But double refractory patient treated by a single agent, it's really a challenge. So I think that these are two interesting points for daratumumab, and certainly, which is certainly a great hope for the future.
Right, right.
Probably it will not be used as a single agent. It will be used
Right.
in combination with other agents.
So this is a really important point that Jean-Luc is making, is that for the trials, we have to satisfy for the FDA something that is called unmet need, which means that the patients have got to have gone through everything and then get the DARA as kind of a last resort. But of necessity, that means that probably we're not going to see the best responses in those patients. They may have very aggressive disease, and it's not a fair test for many of the patients, really. But that's what we need to do to get the approval through the FDA. Once we get the approval, we're going to be using it earlier, and we're going to be using it in combos where we'll get better results. Okay.
Okay, thank you, doctor. I have a question right here.
In your example about the measles vaccine, and this is not about measles, you mentioned the woman who had no more myeloma, but she got a lytic lesion.
Right.
And I don't understand that if the myeloma has pretty much disappeared, why you would get a lytic lesion? Is this a very naive
Right.
question, or it just doesn't seem, it
No,
seems counterintuitive to me?
No, it's a terminology. They didn't report this MRD testing. So she had a complete remission by traditional standards. But, you know, I showed you the iceberg. I'm sure that she had a small number of cells left that seeded back into the skull. As Dr. Vesio was saying, some of these cells are floating around, and then an optimal area they'll seed back in. So she had a small number of cells that were not wiped out. Yeah.
Question over here.
Okay.
You stated that daratumumab works by itself.
Yes.
Does this mean that we can say goodbye dexamethasone?
Well, I think that possibly. I mean, I think that obviously, I think everything works better with Dex, except your relationship with your wife. But I don't know. What do you think about that, Bob?
Well, I think, there's some drugs that we don't use so often anymore. Like, I don't know the last time I've given vincristine, so it didn't work very well, and it caused some side effects. So kind of as better drugs come along, then the less effective and certainly more toxic drugs will fade away. But dexamethasone, unfortunately, is still a pretty effective drug. So
Right.
yeah, won't be soon.
Yeah. So Jean-Luc, I know in the French IFM study, you focused on using Revlimid without Dex for the maintenance because you even thought that the Dex could have some negative impact. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So maybe it could be a way to go. The Dex can interfere with the immune system, and so it's possible that, Dex-free could happen.
Question over here.
So, maybe I am asking this question too quickly. I had measles, but my grandfather died of measles.
Okay.
And I was wondering if I ever get the option to get a measles injection, if I should consider it even.
Okay, this touches on an aspect that I showed, but I didn't really comment on it. So we've mostly all had measles vaccination, okay? So that means that we mostly all have measles antibody in our blood. So if you give this massive dose of the measles vaccine, it will be attacked by the antibodies in your blood, and it will never get to the bone marrow to attack the myeloma. And so these patients who were treated and who responded, they had low levels of the antibody in the blood, which allowed them to be treated. And that's the reason they've actually switched to this other virus, which is VSV, where there are no antibodies in the blood. So the application of this measles vaccine is limited to patients who have low levels of the measles antibody. So strangely enough, do not get a new measles vaccination, because then that'll mean that you won't be eligible for this trial. By the way, when they opened that phase 2 trial at Mayo in October, there were over 2,000 patients that signed up for that trial. Just
Right here.
When I was looking at the 10 therapies that you had put up,
Yes.
It seemed like maybe only 2 of them were immunotherapies.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, because so much effort, it seems like in the myeloma community, is about knocking down the immune system.
Right.
And to have a successful immunotherapy drug, you have to have a healthy immune system to harness to attack the target that you're trying to attack. Does that mean that there are some group of myeloma experts who are campaigning for strengthening the immune system so that these immunotherapies have a better chance of working?
Right. Well, I think that there's a whole new area opening up, which is called, and I didn't know what this is, but it was called IO, which is immuno-oncology. And the BMS company, they came to my office and they said they wanted to talk about IO, and I was like, IO you? Or what is the IO? It's, yeah, immuno-oncology. And so they're really fired up about this, all different things targeting the immune system. And so it is a new area for us. But I think that for me, the main way to improve your immune system is to get rid of the myeloma, and then it'll...
You're right. I think that it's a strategy which has not been very successful in multiple myeloma because the immune system is not good from the beginning. due to the illness, due to the disease, but also due to the treatment.
Yes.
But nevertheless, I think that this approach is becoming more and more attractive, and we have examples in oncology, especially with the treatment of melanoma and of lung cancer with the anti-PD-1 and anti-PD-L1, the checkpoint inhibitor that Brian showed. He showed a slide about that. So the oncologists have a very brilliant results with the anti-PD-1, especially anti-PD-1 in melanoma patients and lung cancer patients. So it's also a great hope for multiple myeloma, although we need more data before being...
Right. So that, I mean, in melanoma, what they did is they actually used a combination of 2 checkpoint inhibitors. They blocked both sides of that arrow, the PD-1, the PD-L1, and with the combination, they actually had dramatic results in melanoma with the increase in the T cells killing the melanoma. So, but it doesn't seem to be quite so simple in myeloma because the immune system is definitely damaged. So we have to see. Okay.
We have a question over here.
All right.
Are there any elotuzumab trials with Velcade and carfilzomib, and would you expect the same kind of complementary benefit for that class of medication?
Okay, good questions. I think actually both were presented at ASCO, as a matter of fact. I don't know, you guys want to comment on that? With elotuzumab, the results with the proteasome inhibitor as well with Velcade were not quite as good. Synergy is best with the IMiD class. But I think that they tried it across the board. And this is very important in terms of the drug approval, where I believe they're trying to get approval that would allow the elotuzumab to be used as part of all the different combos, even although it mostly works with the Revlimid.
Doctors?
All right.
Going back to the lesion in the skull with that one lady, what happens to that lesion eventually? Because
she had radiation therapy, which I think and probably did completely wipe it out. So that lesion is probably gone for good, I would think, right?
Hopefully, in that particular area.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, the concept
this is a firm medical opinion. Hopefully.
The drug.
But say you have a lesion now. It has nothing to do with the treatment. Say there is a lesion right here. What's going to happen to it? It's not other bone break or anything. I hope not.
Yeah, well, wherever it is, it can still grow, and if you ignore it, then it grows deeper into and even can grow into the fluid around the brain. So it is an important area to fix. So the concept, what happened is the drug, the virus, the vaccine worked maybe in all parts of her body, but it didn't kill a few stragglers up in her skull, and those cells slowly, and in her case, she had more aggressive disease, rapidly grew, and so she was left with those cells that didn't die, and hopefully the radiation killed those.
But other than her, say you have a lesion and you have had, you're in a relapse, but you had a whole body scan done, and the only thing they found was a 5mm lesion in the skull. What are they going to do to it? How do you treat that?
You might, you might give it radiation, or it might be an indicator of relapse, and you might restart therapy possibly. The main thing about the skull lesions, which is kind of odd, is that they affect the skull, but very rarely do they penetrate in, which is great. They will just expand in, and so if you radiate them, usually there's not any associated brain damage. So this is a really fortunate thing, is that they're usually not a problem.